And tonight we would like to talk about how education has changed in the last year, especially given the COVID crisis. But we would like also to focus on the specific data protection and copyright issues that have been brought about by this rapid shift to online learning. And before introducing who is going to be with us today, as I was mentioning, please mute your mic, turn your video off at least during the presentation. Then you can, of course, turn it off again, turn it on again. And if you have any question, you can post it in chat. And if you want to do tweet, we're super happy about that. There is a hashtag, which is legal hack, and our account on Twitter is legalhackerslux. And if you would like to follow our next events, it's going to be, you can follow us on Twitter, on Meetup, and on LinkedIn. With this, let me stop sharing, and you should be able to see me again, I hope. Okay. So, yes, can you hear me? Well, okay, wonderful. So, first of all, I would like to introduce Chris, which, can I say, Chris, that we have been allies since the very birth, before the birth of Legal Hackers, actually. So I'm very happy for you to be here. And Chris Pinchen is an expert in data protection, data privacy, and he is the organizer of the privacy salons in Luxembourg. And he's also a B-Secure trainer and ambassador. And he's here for these activities, but also because he has been involved in the activities of the InSafe network, which is the network of the Safer Internet Centers. And Chris, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks for inviting us to participate. So, as Ariana mentioned, I do all of those things, and there's a couple of relevant things that we've been working on in the context of data and privacy and this kind of move to online education. And there's kind of two things I'd really like to cover. When the pandemic began and when everything started moving online and things, Ariana mentioned a thing called Privacy Salon, and a Privacy Salon is kind of more or less roughly a monthly meeting where people that are interested discuss different issues about privacy, or we look at practical tools, or we look at practical ways of dealing with privacy and things. So, of course, as the pandemic created such a big impact on that, we had a lot to talk about, and we also had to kind of quickly find tools and things that we could use ourselves, because as an organization, we moved our stuff online right at the beginning. And fortunately, Paolo, who is in the room here, and I'm sure he can explain more about this later, he actually provides a lot of open source tools and things in both a business and personal context, and was a member also of Privacy Salon and things. So we began talking with Paolo about different platforms we could use, so that when we were doing our activities online, that we were protecting the privacy of the participants and ourselves as much as possible. And Paolo has a suite of tools, and one of which was Big Blue Button, which he had already started using in Italy in various schools once as the pandemic began. So we were able very quickly, due to knowing Paolo, to be able to move our stuff online in this way. And the topics we began talking about, obviously at that time, were the pandemic, and we had quite some issues immediately from people from both sides of the education thing, of parents or students who were concerned about the kind of intrusive nature of having online lessons and classes, and what was the legalities about that kind of situation. What is the legality of often schools or individual teachers obliging pupils to turn on their webcams, for example, when they're maybe in their bedrooms or wherever it is? What is the legality of that, and to what degree could that affect also the data processing? To what effect was that? an issue, and it was very clear that nobody had any idea about that. Teachers had been thrown into the kind of situation of, okay, from Monday you're moving all your stuff online, and fortunately we've got the Microsoft Cloud, because in Luxembourg all schools have the Microsoft Cloud, and that's where they work. So of course immediately this is something that those of us in the privacy community in Luxembourg have been annoyed about for many years, and have been trying to fight, but it's the Ministry of Education imposed that platform on the education system here in Luxembourg. So they already had those platforms and they moved online, but the teachers were not prepared to do this online thing. The students were not prepared, and obviously parents were also having to work online, often in situations where, again, their own privacy was challenged, and that the young people, they also had to kind of respond to how the young people were doing that. So I think the kind of chaotic nature of the beginning of the pandemic was felt by everybody. Clearly, nobody was prepared for that. I think Zoom is a great example of that. Zoom has become a word now, like to Google, to Zoom. But at the moment when the pandemic began, nobody had heard of Zoom, and there were many criticisms of Zoom, and they have spent a lot of money employing a very good high-level security team to address some of those issues. They still have multiple issues beyond the kind of security of the platform with regards to data and privacy. So I think we've seen that. But by the way, Ariana, remember to cut me off, because you said very clearly 15 minutes. So, just get rid of me when I need to, okay? When you need to.
No, you like 5-10 minutes, absolutely. But maybe you need to be at a certain point, as you mentioned, so no problem at
all. So I think that was the kind of the main the kind of big issue at the beginning, and I think the chaos was the big issue there, and I think that's to have been expected in that situation. Nobody foresaw that situation, although there are people, for example, Paolo or myself, that for years have been trying to, in a way, kind of prepare for that situation in various initiatives. And I don't want to spend a lot of time here, and also I have to leave, and I'll tell you why. So one of the projects that Ariana mentioned that I'm also involved in is Be Secure is the Safer Internet Centre of Luxembourg, and it's part of a European group called InSafe, which is the Safer Internet Centre of each European country. That network has a big event which takes place every November in Brussels, the Safer Internet Forum. And as part of that Safer Internet Forum, there's what's called the European Youth Panel, where we get youth representatives from across Europe. We normally, in the past, we would have a couple of online meetings, and then we would convene in Brussels, work for 2 or 3 days, preparing content, whatever we were preparing for the Safer Internet Forum, and take part of that forum, which is very important in the kind of world of safer internet centers and privacy. You have, for example, representatives of industry, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, whoever. You have obviously the European Commission. It's organized by the European Commission. You have academics, you have NGOs, you have all of the kind of different groups all represented there. So it's kind of the highest level. And we actually do have the young people from that in meetings with, like, the boss of TikTok or in Europe or whatever. We do set those things up. So normally we take about 15 young people, but this year obviously we moved it online. And we had 48 young people from 14 countries. And we had to create this kind of participatory experience which would replicate to some degree what we've done in previous years. And right now at 6 o'clock, the closing party of that event began. So that's why I have to leave. But the interesting thing about that was that the topic of the forum this year was inclusion, and that was inclusion in the topic of digital inclusion. There was also inclusion in the context of disability. So there was a big focus this year on disability. And we took that very much as our starting point. We decided that we needed to create a kind of platform using privacy protecting applications that could provide the various things we needed. So we needed a forum, we needed a form of instant messaging, we needed a video conferencing platform, and we needed a platform to host videos, because finally the young people were going to present videos. And in the chat now, I've put the link. Again, this is a platform hosted by Paolo here in Luxembourg, the PeerTube. I've put the link there where you can see the videos that the young people created. The first 4 or 5 videos there were created by the groups of people. Now, the interesting thing, as I say, was that we focused on, we organized a privacy protecting platform. Paolo, maybe if you have questions about that later, Paolo will be able to answer them. And then we began talking with the young people about what was their experience of online schooling and education during the pandemic. We asked them how the pandemic changed their lives. And their primary concerns were not necessarily data. Their primary concern was that it was crap, that the systems didn't work, they collapsed all the time, and that teachers had no idea how to use and operate them. So their lived experience of this kind of being moved online, and this was from across Europe. We had people from Iceland all the way down to Greece. So this was a shared experience. In some countries, I think in Latvia and a couple of other countries, we had a better experience, possibly of infrastructure and things. But in the majority of the countries, all of the young people explained that it was a disastrous experience for them to have to study in this way. But there was a good side to this, and the good side of this came from the people, because we included a group of people with disabilities who would never have been able to participate had this experience not been online. And those people were either with physical disabilities, which prevented them from travel or participating in these kind of events, or people with diverse neurological backgrounds, autistic, ADDH, etc., etc. And there we found some very, very interesting things. I'll just give you a couple of examples. One of the most interesting things was that the majority of people involved in the project with disabilities said that the pandemic had been a great experience for them, because it enabled them to participate on an equal level with everybody else, in the sense they didn't have any kind of physical barriers, which often young people have in going to schools or whatever. Or if those people were had anxiety or autistic or whatever, it removed the barrier of them having to go into classrooms, having to be in environments which they find very intrusive and very difficult to negotiate. It also enabled them to focus more on their work and participate more in their work in different ways, because they removed those barriers. So that was a very interesting thing. And one of the most interesting things with respect to privacy in these aspects came from one of the people who is autistic. She lives in Iceland, and she said that while the ability to participate was greatly improved, and one of the reasons it was greatly improved was because people were using webcams in the street, because people were wearing masks. For autistic people, at least in the experience of this person and others that were in the project, they said that they need to see people, they need to see facial expressions to be able to interpret what people are saying, to interpret emotions. And the thing of everybody wearing masks was an incredible barrier for them, and made it very, very difficult. They stated that they normally have privacy issues online anyway, because the platforms are not considered, they're not created in a way which gives which promotes any kind of trust mechanisms for people in that situation, because the whole friending thing and all of these kind of issues is very much focused on neuronormality, etc., etc. So there were these pros and cons of these things, but in the majority of cases of the young people that we were involved in, the issue of privacy, in the sense of data privacy, was not a great concern. Their main concern was just the platforms were rubbish. They couldn't use them. The teachers didn't know how to use them. The infrastructure was terrible, etc., etc. So that was a very interesting issue. Or an interesting situation. The issue of privacy of their content came very low on their list, just because it was such a struggle to be able to even participate online. Their own experience of using the platforms we provided for them, they said it was great. They found it very simple to use. We talked about the kind of privacy issues of that. They were very happy that we were providing those things, and they were very annoyed that the platforms that they were kind of given were not respecting their privacy, or that were not and were potentially using their data in many ways that they had no control over. So I think that's a kind of general overview of the experiences we've had. One thing that I would add from a perspective from the Safer Internet Centres is that every Safer Internet Centre runs a helpline, and each of those helplines has had far more work this year from both young people and adults talking about difficulties associated with either being at home in kind of intense ways, or the kind of issues, but the issues related to the learning and studying at home has created a lot of tension and issues, which have resulted in a higher number of calls to the kind of InSafe network, and also the issue of being at home in sometimes violent and oppressive ways. And apart from that, we also had the issue of just people that didn't have the resources to be able to participate. So depending on which country you came from, maybe governments did provide some sort of infrastructure or laptops or whatever, so that young people could participate in their educational studies, and some didn't. And so there was immediately a case of exclusion of people that did not have the means to use this. The other great thing that I liked about it was I saw lots of TikToks of people showing how to pretend they were in class when really they weren't in class, but they just had screens of them studying. I think the kids came up with some very, very creative ways of avoiding the parts of online education that they were not particularly interested in, and they showed their creativity in these ways. So I put the link there to the videos. I'll put another link to the project generally, so you can see a little bit of what that project was about. And I think that's the kind of overview of the experience we've had of, obviously, Be Secure, the Safer Internet Centres, we do lots of in-school trainings, and a lot of those trainings have been cancelled. And in some countries, they did move those kind of Safer Internet trainings online, with various different reactions from people. So I think that's another interesting thing. We've moved a lot of trainings online. I've done a lot of trainings with parents online, which have been much better doing them online than doing them physically in person, to be honest.
Why?
I think one of the advantages of moving things online has been that you could get participation of people that wouldn't otherwise be able to come. So you have people that have possibly a greater interest in that. Often the people that came along to those events when they were in the school was because their kid was playing football in the school football team, and they had to do something, and they were hanging around in the school. I think they possibly had a greater interest. But I think generally, in my experience, and I previously was a teacher, and I did teach online classes, I found that people in an online environment are far more focused. than in a classroom environment. That's my experience. I was teaching adults, and in this case, I was dealing with adults, and I think that they're more focused. But I think certainly the parents' privacy salons we've done have been far more beneficial doing them online, and we've been able to address and follow up with things, give people links and things. And in fact, we're going to do the advanced parents' privacy salon, which is more technical, looking at technical aspects of protecting themselves online.
Do also teachers participate usually?
Depends. I mean, we would like them to. That one thing that is very clear in the in doing safer internet training in schools is that if you have a teacher that is interested, it completely changes the experience. If you have a teacher, which many of the times when we're doing safer internet training at the school, the teacher tries to leave the class or sits at the back of the class reading their emails or things like this. If you have a teacher that participates, and in fact, if you have a teacher that explains their own issues and things, then that changes significantly, depending on the age group of the young people. If they're, kind of 15, 16-year-old teenagers trying to be cool, and that's not going to work. But then nothing is going to work with that group generally. So, if they're younger, if they're like 11, 12-year-olds and their teacher tells them about I had one example, a teacher said she sent an email to her father and then, and then wishes she could have taken back that email. And the whole rest of the class was her talking about her experiences of that. And that was fantastic because the children had a relationship with her already. And because she's such an authority figure to them, to see that a person in her position had committed an error and couldn't rectify it and had lived with the consequences. And what she'd learned from that experience was a far more powerful thing than anything I could have taught or anything I could have imparted in that classroom. So if you do get an interested teacher and they take the advantage to talk about the subject before and to talk about it and discuss it afterwards, then that completely changes the experience of trying to talk about internet security or internet safety with young people. But if you get the kind of teacher that just sits at the back of the class or wants to go out, I insist that the teacher stays in the classroom, because I am not personally responsible for the young people in that classroom. I am not legally responsible.
Sure.
In other countries, I know that some of the trainers prefer that the teacher leaves because then the kids will explain more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
share more the personal experience.
Yeah, so you have to kind of play with this, but I get them to do that anyway. So those are the kind of experiences. I think going forward, my kind of quick conclusion, I think I quickly looked at the work of the work that you've in fact included here, the emergency remote teaching, and these kind of issues, and I think it's obviously a very, very important topic, and it's going to be a very important topic because now we're at this stage, we're not going back.
That's what I was wondering, Chris, also, like with respect to the experience that you have, then I'll let you go. I was wondering whether the experience so it's been almost 1 year, right? And and all over Europe, there are many universities that are still completely online and many schools as well. So I was wondering, has the experience for students got enhanced somehow? Is it better right now, or is it the same as it was 1 year ago when it was emergency teaching?
It's the same. I think if you watch, there's one video of that group of videos that specifically talked about, because one of the topics they talked about was future internet, and one of the topics they specifically talked about was this thing of what they've experienced. And for most of the young people in that group who worked on that, what they demanded was better training for teachers, that teachers needed to be trained on how to do this. You can't just say, okay, now you teach online, and the teachers are just expected to, just move the stuff, which is similar also to educational programs where it's now we throw an iPad. Now everybody in the class uses an iPad for education, but the teacher has never been trained in how to use, iPads or or digital media in a pedagogical context. So it's just like, what the experience of that is terrible. So they demanded that situation, better infrastructure, both from an infrastructure from a network perspective and also from a platform perspective, in the sense of the platforms they were obliged to use and how they were obliged to use them. And certainly with better features, more built in from an educational perspective, which would enable them to do that, and just things like network connectivity, and you can't expect to do that. But there is one video which is very specific. There's two, in fact. If you look at those videos, they're very short. They're like 2 or 3 minutes. And there's two of them which very concretely deal with this topic, in the sense of either you do this or you get chaos. Basically, either you invest in the kind of education in this online thing, or you're going to get a complete disaster, is from their experience. Supporting teachers, giving infrastructure to teachers and to young people. And even if we go back to a kind of hybrid educational experience of more classroom and some network. One of the big complaints they said was, hey, these tools have been around for a long time now. Why are we doing 21st teaching with a 19th century context? Why are we doing that? It makes no sense. It makes no sense to them. And again, in this specific group of people, because this specific group of people do have a focus on privacy, then obviously they included in that the protection of their data. And why should they? And as usual, why, as young people, do they have no choice? Why are they just said, you will use this platform, and if Microsoft want to sell all of the material and data and shit that you're putting on here, why do they have no choice in that matter?
Yeah, well, I guess it's kind of decisions that are also taken quite high, right? Also in every kind of institution. I don't think that even if you work in a company, even if you work at a university, you do not have that kind of choice.
Yeah, but they were saying that that's something that needs to be resolved. That has to be built in, because you can't just create even a better experience and all this, and at the same time still be selling off, and not indicating to users this is what is happening.
Yeah.
Okay, you're using this platform, and that was the same within the context of companies. It's the same of people working from home. Hang on, I'm using my personal computer or my personal network or whatever. And I'm logged into Zoom, and or some companies that are videoing people to ensure that they're at their desks, all of these kind of things. What's the legality of these situations? To what extent can a company oblige you to do that, to use the platforms, to monitor you within those kind of platforms and things like that? And certainly there are some educational tools that are coming out, and I'm sure the speakers know about those kind of things, which are monitoring your attention span. Are you focused? I mean, Zoom is a typical example of that, where you could say, oh no, the person is actually checking their email or whatever it is, looking in another window. So your privacy is being violated in multiple ways when you're going about something which you are obliged to do by the company or by your school. So I think these are kind of some of the issues. I've spoken for too long, as usual. Sorry.
Thank you. It was great, actually, to also get a glimpse about what the younger users of these tools think about the experience of the last year. I'm super worried about what younger people are living right now, especially people in school. And also, all the students that we have at the university, I really do not envy them at all.
Our age range, just to point on that, our age range was from 12 to 18. So we went through the whole age range. So it's an interesting experience as well. Over that.
Yeah. Thank you so much also for sharing the resources, Chris, and we'll let you go to the party. Yeah. There are other questions from the other speakers or the other participants before you go.
Well, not for me, but it was super interesting, and I think inclusion was apart from pandemic the key word of 2020 because of Black Lives Matter, and also because when every aspect of our life is online, and obviously inclusion becomes a primary concern. Being online favors inclusion. It can also hinder inclusion, and I think copyright and privacy can play a role in both like directions. So hopefully what we're going to talk about now is somehow connected to what generously shared.
And I will be checking out the video to see what happens for the rest of the event. Okay.
Wonderful.
So, thank you very much. I'm going to check out. Have a great session. Bye bye.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye, Chris.
Okay, great. So Rossana and Guido, maybe I will just say a couple of words of introduction for you, if you don't mind. Guido Noto Diega is an associate professor of intellectual property law and privacy law at the University of Stirling. And his main expertise is in Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, robotics, and blockchain. Whereas Rossana Ducato is lecturer in IT law and regulation at the University of Aberdeen, and she was previously also a postdoc at the UC Louvain, where she's still teaching a Jamone module called European IT Law by Design. And she's an expert in many domains, including consumer protection, data protection, e-health. I will just give you the floor. I would say Rossana and Guido, and I'm really looking forward for this presentation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Ariana, for the invitation. We are delighted to be here. Can you see the presentation?
Perfectly.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, we're really happy to be here, and both personally and professionally, this is a great opportunity to share our research. That is about what we can call the platformization of education. What happens when essentially we delegate to big tech and US-based companies most of our learning that happens now online because of COVID. And as Chris said, it's really here to stay. There's no going back in a way. So how can we move forward, like still using some form of kind of online teaching, but maybe in a way that better fosters inclusion, privacy, and obviously creativity. I'm going to look at some copyright aspects very briefly. I promise to be within 10 minutes, and then I'm going to hand the floor to Rossana, that is going to consider some issues of privacy. I suppose that Zoom, is probably the symbol of this move online, not only of teaching, but video conferencing and other related activities. And there has been a deluge of news regarding cybersecurity and freedom of expression issues related to Zoom, censorship, but also other companies, other platforms. Microsoft Teams were not immune from attacks. And so we started with this team led by Rossana and colleagues from many universities around Europe. We started thinking about what were the legal issues in this move online and what we could do as lawyers. And this is somehow connected to the issue, to one of the issues that I've been thinking about and Rossana has been thinking about for many years. That is the issue of the terms of service. So we're using these platforms, our students, our children are using these platforms, clicking on accept, to accept in terms that they never read, that they never negotiated, they never understood. So we were curious to see what we were sort of agreeing and what our students and our colleagues were agreeing to when using these platforms. We considered, obviously there is a variety of different platforms. We only looked at Zoom, Teams, Google, Discord, YouTube, Jitsi that we're using today, Moodle Cloud, Facebook, and Skype. And we reflected on this phenomenon of private ordering. Traditionally, human behavior was regulated by laws. Today, it's probably regulated by terms and conditions and binary code more than kind of statutes. So we started reading all these documents that nobody else reads, and we found a number of things that we think are important, and that call for sort of better awareness around what we sort of hand over in terms of our data and our contents when we click accept. The focus initially was on emergency remote teaching, because when the pandemic happened, we thought that there was a sudden temporary shift of learning from offline to online. But then, we understood that this was here to stay. So it's important to reflect on remote teaching more generally, not just emergency, because we are probably beyond that. And our focus was on kind of a more European Union angle rather than necessarily a more domestic approach. Today, because of limit of time, I'm going to look at only one of potentially 4 copyright issues that we have in remote teaching, issues of control. We'll see what that means. But maybe if there is time during the Q&A, we can also look at other issues that are issues of liability, copyright exceptions, and private sanctions. So issues of control. So essentially, the question is, what happens when a teacher or a student uploads or shares content on learning materials, contents, etc., on these platforms? The starting point is that we own whoever creates a content usually owns that content. So if a student takes notes or if a student produces a dissertation, usually they will be regarded as owned by the student, and similar provisions apply to staff. Now, if at the first reading of these terms and conditions, you can see that all the platforms claim that they are not taking away the ownership of the contents that users upload and share. So one could think, oh, well, there is no problem here because, I can upload whatever I want on Zoom and the other platforms, and I still retain ownership, right? So there is really no problem. However, what we argue is that it is still problematic because what matters is not ownership. Ownership is a formal legalistic concept. What really matters is control. Who factually controls our contents, especially our learning material? To answer this question, it doesn't matter. To answer this question, we kind of considered the issue of licenses. So in these terms and conditions that nobody reads, there are what we technically call licenses. A license is a permission from the owner of some copyright material to use that material. Okay, by accepting the terms and conditions, we are granting the big tech that is behind these platforms. We are granting permission to use our learning materials. Now, the most common form of license in the context of remote teaching is a license to use, copy, and modify the content, which means that Microsoft Teams, in theory, can use the materials that I upload for my students and can modify them. Less common licenses include a permission to run, communicate, share, disclose, reformat the contents. Essentially, this gives you a sense of the sort of freedom and discretion that the companies behind those platforms can have when it comes to the contents that staff and students upload and share. Now, what's the purpose for which these companies can use my materials and my students' materials? If we look at Jitsi represents a best practice in this field, and therefore I'm very happy that we are using it now for this talk. And it's best practice because Jitsi says that users' content is licensed I quote, solely for the limited purpose of operating the service. So we know that that Jitsi is not going to resell our content. It's not going to modify it for other purposes. It's only using this the content that users generate only for the purposes of operating the service. However, we cannot say that also the other platforms sort of adopt this approach. Because it is really common for these platforms like Facebook, YouTube, etc., to use our contents also to improve the service and to provide us with a personalized experience. And there is evidence that when it comes to personalization, the line between personalization and manipulation is really indeed very blurred. And what's even more worrying is that our content is licensed to also third parties, including sort of other companies that are contractors of the main platforms that can reuse our contents for a number of purposes, including research and development. You might have noticed that I haven't mentioned Google and Zoom in this slide yet, not because they are the best, but maybe possibly because they are the worst, in the sense that they don't even include expressly a license in their terms and conditions. So we don't really know what they're going to do with our contents and how. The last thing to know about these licenses that are contained in terms and conditions is that the most common of them is a worldwide license. So we are allowing these companies to reuse our materials everywhere in the world. And in a way, this is okay, in the sense that it's obvious that if you have a customer in Europe and you are a US-based company, you kind of need a worldwide or at least an international form of license. There are other forms of licenses that are less common and more sort of interesting. For instance, Discord includes a perpetual license. So until the end of time, in principle, Discord could reuse my contents. Obviously, there is at least a limit in the sense that after 70 years from my death, then copyright should expire. So at least then the content shouldn't be sort of reused. There are issues that I'm not going to touch today. There are issues of liability, freedom of expression, private power. Maybe we can deal with them later if we have time. But I think it's better if I can hand the floor to Dr. Rossana Ducato, University of Aberdeen, who is the leader of this project.
Yeah, so I will continue with the exploration of the data protection and privacy issue. Okay, so I'm going to the screen, Guido.
Oh, so I thought, do you want me to share?
It's okay. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I will move on with the privacy and data protection issues. Of course, again, we will not have the time to tackle all of the issues that we have spotted, but I've posted some resources in the chat if you want to have the full picture of the ongoing studying and research that we are doing. So, just to give you a general overview of the main issues at stake, really a very brief introduction about how the data protection framework applies to the concept of, to the context of emergency remote teaching or educational purposes in general. So here there is a general representation of what are the main data protection relationship in the educational context. So if there is a processing of data, and there is usually a processing of data within the university infrastructure, so the university is going to be the data controller, so the person or the entity deciding the purposes and the means of the data processing, and then the teachers and students that are the data subjects, so essentially the people whose data are processed. Then the teachers have actually also another possible role as person authorized by the data controller to process the data of the students. So essentially the university instruct instructs the teachers in a way for processing the data of the students. For example, if I want to mark my student, of course, I have to process the name, the surname, the number of the student, the mark, and evaluate the assessment. So all of these are personal data that are processed, for example, in the context of an educational purpose pursued by the university through the teacher. So this is a kind of general scheme that we can have in data processing within this context. Now, what changed with the platform? That we have another actor involved within this general structure, which, first of all, it's nothing illegal because the university can outsource all or part of the processing to a third-party provider by nominating this third party as data processor. So the data processor can enter into this sort of circle of trust, circle of privacy trust within the data processing in general. So with the platformization of education, let's say there is a new actor involved and this kind of involvement has to be carefully scrutinized because there are additional risks involved with this addition. And what are the most problematic issues? Well, the higher educational institution has to check which platforms offer the best guarantees in terms of GDPR compliance. So this is actually an obligation coming from the GDPR as the data controller. So the university has to pick the data processor, so the platform in this case, that is going to be the most privacy protective option, essentially. However, what we have noticed in our study, in our investigation that we started during the lockdown with the rapid switch toward emergency remote teaching, first of all, as also Chris was mentioning, there was a bit of confusion at the beginning. If you remember the initial picture that I show you where the university instructs the teacher about how to act as person authorized to the processing, well, in that first days of confusion, not all teachers received clear instructions. And so in order to ensure the continuity of learning, many teachers decided to choose a platform independently and start teaching, start doing their work. And in this case, maybe they were not always aware that they were becoming de facto data controller, so which is the role that is usually taken by the university. And this is not just a matter of attribution of roles. With roles come also responsibilities. So the teachers were actually wearing a hat that was more complex to wear. And then another, and more generally, with the transition with the use of a third-party platform, one critical issue that we noticed was that the majority of these platforms that we analyzed were actually pursuing some autonomous purposes. So once again, we saw at the beginning that in general, within the university context, the main purpose of the processing is to provide an educational service. So the data processed for educational purposes. While outsourcing, when we are going to outsource some part of the processing to a platform, well, such platforms always, in most of the cases, pursue also additional purposes that could be marketing purposes or the so-called the improvement of the service, and we don't always know what this improvement of the service actually mean. And so the main issue is that how much are these purpose compatible with the initial purposes, so the educational purposes for which the data were originally collected, and how much the university is really aware of this additional purpose, how much the students are aware of these additional purposes. And the general trend, this is nothing surprising, I would say. It's when we were analyzing this privacy policy, we noticed that there was a general lack of transparency, in the sense that on the one hand, some platforms were very precise in saying, we are going to process all this data, we are going to process the data for all these purposes, and these are our lawful basis for which we will process the data. But what was lacking was actually the connection between all this information, in the sense that, for example, it was not clear what data were used for what purpose, or what data were used according to what legal basis. So the information was there, but it was actually meaningless. So it was really difficult then to act upon that information. So it was a classic problem of information overload and general lack of transparency. And then something that we are actually exploring right now, this was not dealt at the beginning in our study, because for a simple reason, because at the beginning within the emergency remote teaching, we were actually focusing on the delivery of teaching and education. Then exams usually come later. But then, yes, actually, during already the summer session, e-proctoring systems, which means essentially online invigilation, were used by some universities. And this raised several problems. The case is actually of e-proctoring is interesting because there is already a first decision that has been issued by the a Dutch court during the last summer. And the Dutch court retained that the use of the e-proctoring system adopted by the University of Amsterdam was in line with the GDPR. So it was a case where the e-proctoring tools were considered compliant with the regulation. Nevertheless, I mean, the work that we are doing right now is to assess how much we can really rely on e-proctoring systems. And so what are the critical points in it? For instance, whether there are less intrusive and alternative means to e-proctoring that do not need the constant monitoring of students in order to guarantee the integrity and validity of exams. And then coming to the conclusions, I've just pinpointed some of the main data protection issues here, but a few important points must be stressed at the end. This rapid shift toward emergency remote teaching, or what can we learn from the pandemic? Probably nothing new, in the sense that the pandemic has simply exacerbated existing problems of our education system. And in particular, what we have noticed is that the lack of infrastructure by public educational services. Again, here, I would like to mention that, as also Guido and Chris were stressing, at the beginning of this lockdown, the general trend was to go with a platform that maybe was already in use, or that was popular, or that was working better than the others. And so schools and university try to rely on external third-party providers. But it's also true that there are actually already some good public infrastructures. For example, in Italy, there is the GAR consortium, or there are better alternatives. So probably there was, on the one hand, a general lack of infrastructure, but probably also a lack of awareness of the possible alternatives that were usable at that time. And the new environment, the new online environment is definitely challenging. Is definitely posing some challenges from a pedagogical point of view, from a technical point of view, but also from a legal point of view. And that was the main goal of our analysis. And so in our research, again, we have stressed the importance of paying attention to the private ordering that is shaping essentially the way we are interacting, the way we are using this tool, and the way also is going to have an impact on education more generally. Emergency remote teaching providers, as also Guido was stressing with the licensing issues, can do essentially whatever they want with our content and data. So they can also share it with third parties, they can reuse it for commercial uses and so on. Teachers' risk becomes the new copyright cops. Guido did not have the time to deal a lot with this, but this is also an aspect that's been taken into account in the paper. And also, as I was stressing, from a data protection point of view, the choice of the platform is also relevant when it's the teacher that is stepping up and choosing the platform. So we are really burdening probably teachers with too many responsibility in this context. And then, from a data protection point of view, so our main concern is this general opaqueness concerning the way data are processed, shared, and transferred. And I mean, our analysis is not purely legalistic in the sense that we, of course, were not interested just to see to perform a sort of checklist to see whether this term was that this provision was not, because privacy and data protection are constitutional enablers of other fundamental rights. So first of all, they have to be respected as such, also for a matter of trust toward the university, toward the school, and also toward the platform, the digital system that we are using. Because if the system is not privacy compliant, then how can we expect that students are going to express themselves freely without fearing any possible negative consequences? So privacy and data protection are fundamental rights as such, but they are also enablers of other important rights, for instance, the right to education, the freedom of expression, and so on. And so I leave you just with 3 open points that maybe we can see together we can discuss together in the Q&A moment. So some short-term and medium long-term scenarios. During the emergency, I mean, the only recommendation that we can do, well, that actually has been done. This was suggested by the Italian Data Protection Authority in March 2020. So use what's available, use the platform, the system, the software that's available, but by adopting appropriate safeguards from a data protection point of view. So pay attention to the privacy settings and try to customize the service in a way that is the most privacy preserving way. Then in the short term, this is something that has to be done to map the existing platforms and perform an evaluation, not only of their characteristics from a technical point of view. So as Chris was mentioning, the platform must work, first of all, but then also we have to take into account what are the features for education and what are the legal characteristics, because we are talking about the protection of our rights. So it's something that cannot come second or third. It's something that has to be done by design. So since the developing, since the first stages of the processing. And then something that we are arguing now in a paper that we are finishing, the one in the of the proctoring that I was mentioning earlier, we call for a more active role of national data protection authorities. Once again, the Italian data protection authorities in March mentioned that it was going to monitor very closely these platforms for educational.
I think you can go, but we're going to hear.
Recording is on.
Recording is on. Okay.
So we are on again. Yeah, so I was mentioning about the role of data protection authorities, that they can definitely monitor this platform. So, for example, in the paper we propose, why we are not going to have the next sweep day focusing on educational platforms. So the sweep day is this initiative launched by the Global Privacy Enforcement Network. So it's this annual exercise that involves several national data protection authorities worldwide, and educational platforms could be the possible object of this study, of this sweep day. And also it's going to be important, the national data protection authorities are going to help university and schools in detecting what are the most preserving privacy options, providing guidance and so on, because this kind of legal analysis is not a simple one. And so we are also to be mindful of the limited resources that universities and schools have. So it's important that this kind of exercise of legal analysis is done collectively in a collaborative way among universities, and possibly coordinated at a central level. In Italy, for example, there is the conference of the rector that could possibly be the organ, the entity to coordinate this effort. And then in the medium long term, why not to think about a public infrastructure for educational services? So we can, we have been relied on commercial platforms for this emergency period, but no one is obliging to continue in that way. So when we start a conversation, a discussion to understand what kind of world we want for university after the pandemic. So there are different options to consider, and there are already some interesting discussions in this sense. But again, so these were just some suggestions for opening the discussion now.
Thank you so much, Rossana and Guido. I think it was a great overview